In 1998, inside an ordinary Japanese apartment, police stumbled upon something that still chills even the most seasoned detectives. Behind those doors, they found evidence of murders and a life that had slowly turned into a nightmare. The killer wasn't some faceless predator lurking in a dark alley. He didn't need a knife to kill. His weapon was words. Futoshi Matsunaga. His victims ate dinner with him, slept under the same roof, and watched each other carry out unthinkable acts under his command. This is the story of a family that stopped being a family. It became a private prison, a house of torture, and a stage for obedience. And no one would have escaped alive if it hadn't been for one single mistake by the man who thought he was a god. If you want to hear the verified facts about this secret cult trapped within four walls, subscribe to Duskwoven and turn on notifications. This channel tells the dark, true stories that are too real to forget. Futoshi Matsunaga was born in 1961 in a small Japanese town. From an early age, he craved control. At school, he manipulated classmates and bragged about his cruelty. As he grew up, he turned that taste for domination into fraud, blackmail, extortion, petty scams. But his real horror story began when he met Junko Ogata. Junko grew up in a strict household. When Matsunaga started seducing her, he shattered every piece of her. Her loyalty to her family, her sense of guilt, her fear of him. Soon, Junko became both his accomplice and his captive. Matsunaga didn't need an army. He needed people he could break, piece by piece, word by word, blow by blow. When he locked Junko's entire family inside his apartment, no one imagined that, for 2 long years, entire generations would vanish behind that door. But that is only the beginning. When Futoshi Matsunaga pulled Junko into his twisted world, he didn't need guns or a gang to keep people under his thumb. All he needed were locked doors, unplugged phones, and a mind that knew exactly how to break another. Junko Ogata, once a quiet, obedient daughter from a good family, became his gateway to something bigger. Total power over the people she loved most. Matsunaga's first tactic was isolation. He cut Junko off from her family, her friends, her money. He told her only he could protect her. Once she was completely dependent, he turned to her family. He charmed his way into her parents' home. Charismatic, confident, the perfect guest. He convinced Junko's mother that the entire Ogata family was in danger. Slowly, he drew them all in. Her mother, father, brother, and her brother's wife. Each one had something he could twist into a weapon. Fear for their children, shame, secrets, debts. When he had them all under one roof, he started testing their limits. He banned them from sleeping properly, forced them to interrogate each other over invented betrayals. Any lie was met with punishment, beatings, starvation, humiliation. Day by day, he stripped away every scrap of dignity they had left. But the worst was yet to come. Matsunaga knew true control doesn't just come from fear of him. It comes from fear of each other. He sowed paranoia, making them believe someone in the family was plotting to betray him. The mother was told to spy on her son. The son was told to watch his wife. The wife reported on her mother-in-law. Every glance, every word was fed back to Matsunaga. The smallest slip meant everyone suffered. Once the rules were clear, he pushed them further. He forced them to inflict pain on each other. Parents beat children, children hit parents. And always, standing there like a conductor, was Matsunaga, the only witness, the only judge. What started as a twisted family drama became a living experiment in cruelty. Sometimes he'd let one of them outside, just to prove they'd never run. He'd threaten that if one escaped, everyone else would die screaming. And they believed him because they'd seen what he could do. There were no chains or barred doors in that apartment. There were only words, lies, and a fear that bound people tighter than steel. And when Matsunaga knew they would never run, he started planning who would be the first to disappear forever. But that is where the nightmare truly began. Once Futoshi Matsunaga had turned a simple apartment into his private prison, he didn't stop at beatings or starvation. He wanted to push further, to see just how far he could break people when fear was their only language. He didn't want to kill with his own hands. He wanted them to do it for him. The first fatal victim was Junko's father. For weeks, Matsunaga kept him in a state of exhaustion, starving him, beating him, accusing him of lies no one could disprove. When the old man could no longer stand, Matsunaga made sure the rest of the family watched him die slowly from hunger and infected wounds. To Matsunaga, it wasn't just murder. It was a message. No one is safe. Next came the children. The children of Junko's brother, Matsunaga's own nieces and nephews. This is the part that still horrifies anyone who hears it. The kids weren't killed in secret. Matsunaga forced their parents to take part in the slow, deliberate horror. Some suffocated them with pillows. Some gave them food laced with poison. If anyone refused, they were beaten so brutally that submission felt like mercy. One chilling testimony comes from Junko herself. In court, she described how Matsunaga made her stand over the dead bodies of her own relatives, forcing her to repeat twisted phrases about family duty and purification. In a country like Japan, where family is sacred and loyalty runs deep, this was blasphemy turned into a weapon. After each death, the air inside that apartment got heavier. The ones left behind couldn't even look each other in the eye. Everyone knew they might be next. And worse, everyone knew they might be forced to help kill the next victim, just to survive one more day. Sometimes neighbors heard faint screams, but in Japan, people rarely knock on a neighbor's door when they suspect something terrible. Privacy is sacred, even when the price is silence. For 2 years, this tiny apartment functioned like a hidden factory of human destruction. Matsunaga was sure no one would ever talk, that no one would ever run. But he miscalculated. Fear can hold people in place until it breaks. And when the cracks started to show, the entire nightmare was ready to collapse. The neighbors heard things, muffled screams, strange noises. But in Japan, no one wants to meddle in someone else's family. The police knocked once or twice, but Matsunaga's lies and Junko's terrified compliance were enough to send them away every time. Matsunaga believed Junko would never betray him. After all, she'd lost everything. Her parents, her brother's family, and she was deeply tangled in the crimes. He'd made her not just a prisoner, but a participant. Who would she turn to? Who would believe her if she did? But in the darkness of that apartment, a single spark of rebellion survived. A teenage girl, a relative of Junko's, who'd seen it all but refused to be crushed completely. Matsunaga thought he'd broken her, just like the rest. But one mistake gave her an opening. In the final months of their horror, Matsunaga grew overconfident. He moved the family to another apartment and loosened his grip just enough for her to slip through. When she got the chance, she ran, straight to the police. What she told them sounded like fiction: locked rooms, forced confessions, murders that turned a family home into a burial ground. At first, the police struggled to believe her. But she didn't come empty-handed. She brought scraps of evidence, bruises, and a story that matched rumors and suspicious disappearances the local officers had buried for years. When they brought Junko in, she finally broke. Days of interrogation peeled away what little loyalty she had left for Matsunaga. She told them everything: the bodies, the torture, the threats, the chemical acid used to hide the remains. In March 2002, police stormed Matsunaga's apartment and arrested him. He acted like it was all a misunderstanding. He claimed the family had turned on him out of jealousy, that Junko was lying to save herself. Even locked up, he tried to manipulate other inmates and officers, weaving the same twisted stories that had once turned a home into a death trap. The trial became front-page news in Japan. The country that prided itself on tight-knit families and safe neighborhoods now faced a question no one wanted to answer. How could this happen behind ordinary walls for years without a single outsider breaking the silence? The evidence left no room for doubt. Matsunaga was sentenced to death. Junko Ogata, despite her defense, received life in prison. To this day, people argue, was Junko just a brainwashed victim or a willing monster herself? One thing was certain. Matsunaga's empire of fear, built on whispers and locked doors, was gone. But the questions he left behind are harder to bury than any body. After Futoshi Matsunaga was sentenced to death and Junko Ogata was given life in prison, Japan was left reeling. This was a country where family is supposed to be sacred, where neighbors pride themselves on safety and community. But Matsunaga's House of Horrors forced everyone to look at the cracks in that illusion. For years, his crimes had hidden behind polite smiles, shut doors, and a culture that values privacy above uncomfortable questions. Even when muffled screams slipped through thin apartment walls, no one wanted to believe a real monster was living next door. When the trial ended, the media flooded the nation with details. Not to sensationalize, but because people needed to understand how a single man could turn an entire family against itself. In court, Junko Ogata told her side. She said Matsunaga destroyed her piece by piece, that she believed escape was impossible. But the jury saw something else too. A woman who held down her own relatives, who lied to the police, who carried out his threats when words weren't enough. Japan is still divided over her. Was she just another victim, or an accomplice who chose survival over her own blood? Matsunaga never showed remorse. Even behind bars, he bragged about his power. He wrote letters describing himself as misunderstood, a genius surrounded by traitors. When the day of his execution came, it was done quietly. Japan rarely announces executions publicly, partly to avoid giving monsters like Matsunaga one last headline. But even if his name faded from the news, the unease he left behind didn't disappear. His story remains a lesson about how manipulation, fear, and silence can kill just as surely as any weapon. It forced Japan to confront the blind spots that let monsters hide in plain sight, and reminded the world that evil doesn't always knock on your door in a mask. Sometimes it sits across the table and calls you family. The apartment where so much horror unfolded was torn down years ago. But for those who know the story, its walls still stand, a reminder that behind any door could be secrets no neighbor wants to hear. If you want to hear more true stories that dig up the darkest corners of reality, subscribe to Duskwoven and turn on notifications. There's always another secret waiting to be told.